Hello, listeners of the Accents podcast on WUKY. I'm your host, Katerina Stoykova, and this episode has been brought to you by Accents Publishing, an independent press for brilliant voices. Today's brilliant voice is poet, fiction, nonfiction writer, and teacher Gaylord Brewer. Hi, Gaylord. Welcome to
Hey,
Accents.
delighted to be here, Katerina. Thank you.
I'm excited for us to talk about your very recent poetry book, Goodbye, Baby. To me, this book is a remarkable literary achievement.
Well, that's kind of you. Obviously anybody who takes a look will see that it's a book that's very personal to me, and I guess we'll get into some of that in a bit here.
Why don't you tell us more about that book, the form, and how it came about?
Well, clearly the primary inspiration was my beloved old dog was getting frailer and frailer, and we clearly had finally reached the end with no more reprieves coming. So I was thinking, trying to recall the timeline. I think about 6 weeks before she died, I started writing these poems. Frankly, I needed a distraction. Everything going on. And then they continued writing them for maybe 5 or 6 months after we lost her. And then I felt like this that I had finished. I didn't have any real clear plan about that, but I feel like they were finished. About the form is interesting. I mean, this is they're all 12-line poems. They're untitled. I've never ever went into a project where the poem was dictated by the form before. And don't ask me where it came from because I have no idea. I just, somewhere I wanted something, I wanted the poems to look like they belong together, look like they belong together. They're all about Lucy in some way or other. And then it just started happening. I wanted something compressed. And, Garrison Keillor has the old line about about the sonnet, sometimes 14 lines just all you need. I decided 12 lines would, one way or the other, would do it. And of course, that created some interesting, that rule created some interesting issues for myself, which was part of trying to solve those. The poem first draft ended up quite a bit shorter, ended up quite a bit longer, which was more typical. Then I'd go back to work on it. And yeah, apparently I liked it because I kept doing them and I was having some reasonably good results.
You said that it was a personal book, and Kathleen Driscoll, who is a very big fan of yours and very big fan of this book, says that this is your most personal book. Did it feel risky to write the poems and even further to publish them?
Certainly the second thing would be the riskier of the two. I mean, one always has the option, right, of just making them personal and keeping them personal, right? But I always write with I mean I'm pretty much am habituated to writing with an audience in mind, even when the material is pretty raw, like in some of these poems. I didn't go in with the idea of writing a book one way or the other, but the poems just kept coming, and the grieving kept going, and we just, after a while, I thought, okay, it may be onto something here. And I did everything different. Even like I was thinking a few moments ago, I always write in the morning, not necessarily early, but I'm a get up, make the coffee, go do the day's writing kind of guy. Now with these, I wrote all these in the late afternoon. That was the habit, and I never ever did that in my life. So I decided to just make as many problems for myself as possible and throw all my usual habits and conventions out the window and see what happened. And I don't know about the riskiness. Like I say, they're not journal entries. There's a certain amount of intimacy to the poems, but I had readers in mind.
Did you read any of the poems to Lucy?
No, no. Well, she would limp in occasionally and lie down while I was working or something, but she was never a great lover of my poetry anyway. She could kind of take it or leave it. She was more concerned about the time I was wasting sitting at the table here, and we could be doing something, important, like rolling around or fighting for a bone or something like that. Um, I don't entirely disagree with that either.
How did you manage to vary the tone of the book? Some of the poems are funny and sarcastic, and others are heartbreaking. Every time I read that book, I cry on several places. Uh, and then others are rooted in the everyday mundane things, such as cooking or shopping, walking through the neighborhood.
That's very kind of you to say that. I appreciate it. One of the ironies of this book is it almost goes without saying, I think, that I would prefer not to have written it, not to have had to have written it. But there you go, right? So, um, in terms of the variation in tone, I mean, hell, you can only stay so bleak and so dark so many days in a row, just for nothing else, again, the sake of the reader. But even trying to vary your own thing up, and I mean, my poetry over the years tends to have a little bit of I don't know, ironic, wiseacre quality to it sometimes. So it just seemed natural that some of those would slip in there. But even poems, you know, as seemingly different as the one. Remember the one about the poet Manigal who starved himself to death in the attempt to see more vivid colors? I don't know. They were all of a piece to me, really. Like I say, the primary thing on my mind was always the immediacy of what was happening to us. And you talk about risk. I think one of the things I thought was riskiest is that I used the landscape so consistently over and over again as in some ways, I think the prominent metaphor in the book. The creek nearby, the wildlife and stuff. I thought, boy, oh boy, I wonder how much of this can I really pull off? But I thought for the project, for what I was doing and its subject, it seemed appropriate to me. So I decided to just go ahead and not worry about that.
I thought it was very grounding to have those consistent images throughout the book.
I don't know what I would have done personally without the creek during those months to walk to sometimes a couple of times a day.
The cover features a creek and a figure and a boat and some clouds.
Ah, journeys and passages, eh? Whether we like them or not. And it is a Mondrian too. I think that's the first big name artist I've ever had on a book. So,
I would love to hear several of the poems in the book.
okay, well, here we go. Again, the poems are all 12 lines, so they're all reasonably short, and I try not to cheat on the line lengths much when I was cutting down those longer ones. So and again, they're all untitled as well, but here's a piece early in the book. Strive to not be a tragic idiot. What will come will come. After the blaze of the slaughter pen, where Negley pulled his surviving boys from Sheridan's trap, the path turns toward a relief of mottled shade, nary a ghost in sight. No human either, just you, the suspicious robins, cool greenery beneath a dome of carnage. Nearby, the boot of your car heavy with clams, mussels, red shrimp, Dungeness crab legs on ice, 2 bottles of gin for your next rebirth. Don't be an idiot. Enjoy your battlefield stroll. Chat with the dead all you like. Then go home. And here's one that picks up on the 12 line. Once I decided on the 12 lines, then I was thinking in 12. So there's an obligatory poem about the apostles. There's one about the 12 days of Christmas that's a bit rude that people like. And this is just riffing on other various 12s. 12 filth-streaked eggs never to be born, snug in their crate. 12 desirous creatures of the zodiac. 12 notches in the clock face. Vagary of midnight, uncertainty of noon. 12 tortured lines of the forlorn guzzle. 12 ribs each side of the human cage awaiting the first blow. 12 walking the moon. 12 royalty in the deck. 12th night before Epiphany. 12th station of the cross and 12 betrayed apostles. 12 gauge broken beneath the bed. 12 months from here to our wilderness. 12 lies of self-belief.
Read us Then I'm Home, Lucy Alive.
Okay. Here's a poem about what for many years was my favorite stretch of road in the world, and it's 266 South, heading home. Then I am home, Lucy alive, and I'm loving on her, kissing Claudia. I'm home. Somewhere near Dinosaur World and Guntown Mountain, the engine warning light flickered out. I felt rumblings of a heady, foolish hope floored it. Raced through 7 minutes of storm, emerged to blue sky, then my favorite stretch of highway on earth, 266 South, and I swear that careering 22.4 miles through Adams Grove, Noreen, across the Rutherford County line, flat out toward Las Casas, where the road ends, I was out of a body, out of my mind. I was flying. You can't tell if you're code switching or virtue signifying, but a new speech is required. Like autumn speaks to the orchard, like crow, relentless in unheeded warning, like the grave without a stone, like a stone to the skull, shiv to the ribs, Zeno's arrow finally come home to the martyr's breast, like the well-seasoned wound, blood under the bridge, like the marrow to bone, broth to bowl, spoon steaming to lips, like the curse of the night sky, the oracle mute, like the gypsy woman a lifetime ago who took one sniff of your new girlfriend and foretold quite correctly that she was pure evil.
I think
Yeah.
that's hysterical.
Um, I really like the way that Cento worked out. That's the first one that I ever wrote, the one in 71, and probably the last one. I've never really even been a fan of them, but I thought that turned out pretty good. I was happy with it. That means it really means I was in a morning when I didn't have, or an afternoon I didn't have any ideas, so I just was fiddling around. Funny story about this poem. I sometimes tell my lit class about how if you're an actor, Shakespeare has you covered through all the different periods. So you go Romeo, Hamlet, Macbeth, Lear, and then, well, I guess you also have to do Prospero, and then you get your covered. You can just die. And I always thought, Katerina, this is one of those poems on the back burner I never got around to writing. And I thought it would be a long one, a section for each of those, at least each of those five plays, or maybe even it'd be an essay. But it ended up being a 12-line poem instead. So probably for the best for it. And the epigraph is from Lear, come not between the dragon and his wrath. My flat-footed Romeo, blind in her sun, long dismissed, and my Hamlet I now realize played to exhaustion. Must I always like a whore unpack my heart with words? Bury the damned father. So I arrive late to the joys of my Macbeth. Arrogant, heedless, barking, mutual destruction. Blood will have blood, and brother, it won't just be mine. A limited engagement, as that violence informs neatly my unhinged Lear, seething in dementia, one boot already stamping the boards. Who can tell me who I am? You think me madman, fool? Maybe I'll bring the terrors of the earth. To finish it, Prospero, emerging from the refuge of my library into hell's tempest. Watch the magic. This thing of darkness, I acknowledge mine. There's your academic.
I admire how tight these poems are and the control that you have over the content and the line.
Well, again, imposing the 12-line rule sometimes got really interesting because I didn't want to let it be too restrictive during the rough draft when you want to let things rip a little bit, right? But I would sometimes end up with a 20-line poem or longer and say, uh-oh, right? And it's certainly possible that the rule could finally damage the poem by really forcing the issue. But I don't have to worry about that either. I made up my mind this is what I was going to do. And then the next part of the process starts. And it's kind of fun to take a poem that's twice as long as it's going to be when you're done with it. And having already decided that and committed to it and then see what happens. So
Did you ever break it into two?
no, I don't know. No, I don't think so. Not that I can recall. And generally, I was pleased with the compression. Just like cut it out, just cut it, just keep cutting and see what happens. And I tell you what did happen a couple of times is in the editing, I would sort of go one way rather than another and end up really being a very, very different poem than the one that I wrote the rough draft. If that makes any sense. If you're cutting half of it out, you may essentially, as you suggested, be cutting out a poem, right? As you're carving the one that you're going to end up with. It was interesting. I wouldn't want to do it for the rest of my life, but for those months, well, again, when I needed distraction and I needed some discipline, I enjoyed doing it.
I have read other books of yours, but this is the only one that you're so consistent with form.
In some ways, this didn't happen very often, but sometimes the poem would just end up quite short.
Mhm.
And so the same rule applies, right? So the idea, of course, is then not to pad the thing, but to try to somehow figure out very different process. Try to open it back up and move back inside of it, and try to think of some meaningful way to expand it. And as I said, I try not to cheat on the line links too much. I think there's one in the poem where I kind of hedge my bet a little bit. It's clearly a little bit shorter than the other poems, but by and large, I try to be honest to the rule and play it straight. So.
I thought it was refreshing to see that one with very short lines. It looked like a list poem of 12 lines.
Well, the one in particular I'm thinking of is the one when you read the poem, you also understand why it's short. The poem is almost about the fact that we were so close to the end there that I really didn't even want to write a poem about it.
Mhm.
So the fact that it halfway disappears on the page, I'm going to argue is part of the is part of the intent finally.
What has the reception been from the readers of that book?
Pretty enthusiastic. I very very generous. I heard from a fellow who's reviewing the book, and he wrote me just a couple of days ago, and he said he thought it was my best book. He's someone who's fairly familiar with my work.
Well, that's what I say also, that this is Gaylord's best book. And, I feel proud that it's an accents book. And I fell in love with that book immediately, the very beginning. And the more I read from it, the more enthusiastic I became. I mean, every time I read it, I was in tears. Not just because I was sad for the suffering of the dog and the suffering of the person who loved this dog so much. It is because of the craft, because of the beauty of the work, because of the sheer amount of poetic skill and talent that has gone into the writing of the individual poems and to put the book together. I think it's a master class in arranging a poetry collection. You can tell us about that.
Well, as I said earlier or suggested, there was certainly a time in my life when there was a lot of chaos that I needed to put some order to. So that was part of. I don't get terribly philosophical about writing poems, but there was an immediacy and a necessity there. And over the last year or two, Katerina, you've written me some very nice emails, and I've appreciated it. I really have. Um, Especially the part of me that wonders if these should have just stayed in a drawer somewhere. You know. And you've been very kind about it, and it's meant something to me. And it's helped the process along too. I mean, the organization, I'll be honest with you, I pretty much played it as it went along. I didn't, the first poem seems appropriate as the first poem. The last poem is clearly the last poem, and I knew when I wrote it was. And then of course the poems are more or less chronologically through the last weeks and then the months afterwards, with the other little oddities that come in, in the process. So one thing I think I mentioned to you, I wrote to you before when we were putting the manuscript together, it was a little bit of a challenge about there is so much tonal shift occasionally. And there are a couple poems in the book that are just kind of are just meant to be kind of funny and silly, right, as well. Um, that I was a little worried about the stumbling through those. But you know what? I don't know about you. I always organize a book or a journal when I publish a journal the same way. You line up all the poems on the table in a few rows, and and ordinarily you just start looking at two or three poems that want to hang out together a little bit and just do it that way. But this book, I couldn't. It confounded that habit. I just found the poems just pretty much stayed in the way I wrote them. And I thought, I don't know if you recall, I did write you at one point. I said I'm a little concerned about some of the really kind of abrupt tonal shifts in the book, but I really didn't know what to do about it. And then I decided, well, to hell with it. They're all of a piece. I wrote them. I'm gonna, you always have to have that arrogance thing, and I think they belong together, and I think they belong together in this order. And honestly, those were very emotionally tumultuous days, so we were having some pretty dramatic tone shifts. And I thought, well, maybe on some subtle level that'll be communicated as well. So, yeah. Plus, you haven't mentioned it, but the book contains one of the very few sex poems I've ever written in my life. It's already turned out to my benefit. I had a friend invited me to read at her women's church reading group, but that was before she read the book. I said, you might want to look at the book first. So that got canceled. And also, yes, an old folks home locally that was going to have me over, they also canceled. So it's worked out pretty good for me. And again, it was, it was actually the same kind of thing. I was thinking, um, I mean, people have read the poem. It's a funny poem, but it is fairly explicit. And
Why? I think we should treat the listeners of accents to that point.
you want me to read that?
Yeah, why not?
Oh, I don't know. Why don't we just be a little, I don't know. Let's be coy about it. I've already had two gigs canceled.
Got it.
Damn poem.
Okay. All right. So, listeners of accents, if you're so curious about that poem that canceled a church appearance and women's group appearance, but it did not prevent Accents Publishing from, enjoying this fantastic book. You can look up Goodbye Baby by Gaylord Brewer.
Well, I was going to say I almost cut it several times. I thought, why? Why? I like the poem. I think it's funny. And again, there are other jarring little turns as well in the book. So at this point in my life, I don't seem to read any reason to be too shy about whatever.
Gaylord, I have read this book at least 5 times. I cannot think of a single poem that rattled me or thought that I thought it was inappropriate. So I don't even know which poem you're talking about.
There is a short sex poem in my second book, Devilfish, but that was 25 years ago. So
Did it cancel any? Did it, knock you off
no,
any?
I couldn't get any readings anyway. It didn't hurt anything. It didn't make any difference.
Got it.
Uh,
Would you kindly read the last several poems in the book and then we'll talk about other things?
you may have noticed that a lot of other dogs start appearing near the end of the book because I'm kind of doing a little bit of a resume, I guess, of my own feelings and affections. I started thinking back like several years ago. We went dog sledding in Quebec a couple of times and other little intersections. And here's another poem about we went back to Quebec City, a place we love. We often go in the wintertime and we went to December after Lucy had died. So I had my dog radar was pretty sharp and I wrote this poem. Parading the streets of old Quebec City, every cobbled festive corner, canines in winter fineries of vest, cape and cowl, leggings, leather booties, and defensive ice. Haughty purebred and straining mongrel, whimpering pup, limping, joint swollen ancient still in the game. Toys in blanketed papooses, a quick blink into shocking cold reality. Flown home today to this silent house, colored lights on the mirror, glittering boxes on the sill, nutcracker at blank attention, one rough-hewn wise man listing on crooked leg. The unfinished rawhide treat you left behind. As to those adored animals alive in that foreign city, what do any of them mean to me? And here's the last poem in the book. And it was the last one I wrote. I had in mind to do a few more, but I could feel it that things were closing a little bit. And when I wrote this, I decided to just go ahead and let things go. This year that broke us finished. The next beyond my reckoning. You left us 5 months ago today. I can't continue to be consumed by those last hours, last minutes, and resolve to try. I open the album of our beginning. There you are, furball in my palm, floppy-eared, pink-bellied runt of the rescued litter. As those seasons pass, you grow into your beauty, wit, intelligence, and humor. You become Lucy. There, last image blur of joy and snow, boundless, fully arrived. Beyond that final page, all those lucky years we wanted to have together and did. Goodbye, baby. God, you were loved. Rest now. I wrote about 100 poems, so cut about 30. There's some interesting tidbits in the like. There are two Joe Biden poems. One about that disastrous, alarming debate, and then one when he finally dropped out of the race. And so the oddballs that are they really are all over the place. But I decided to those two poems aren't very good, but also they were a little too broad. I wanted to keep the world of this book a little bit smaller, even though it is far ranging in some ways. But you know, I think even when I'm talking about other topics, those topics still come in sort of somehow contained in the sort of sphere of the world of the book of poems, I think. That was my intention anyway.
Tell us about the title.
Usually I can reel off to you two or three alternate titles for a book that didn't make it. They didn't make the cut. This time I can't think of any. I'm sure there were some. Um, they were maybe even a little bit simpler or more direct or whatever, but then I thought, you know what? I don't know. I don't mean that, but just, something when it occurred to me, and I mean, that was a phrase I was saying a lot during a certain period of time. There was just something sort of unadorned and very direct about it that I thought, okay, let's do that. Not my typical kind of title, I don't think, whatever that might mean, but yeah, I like um, the directness of it.
And one other thing that I really enjoyed about the book is it had a domestic component to it, food, eating nice meal or drinking a good glass of wine. It's kind of like those comforts.
Well, I mean, whether one likes it or not, even as you're going through some kind of great loss, life goes on, right? And you keep, and we still like, well, there were a few days there where everything was a bit tasteless, but after a while, certain aspects of life continue. And in fact, I don't know, I don't mean to be perverse, but I think one of the things I was trying to monitor was I didn't want to sort of be self-aggrandizing in my grieving. It's a balance, right? You want to try to approach things honestly and candidly, but life went on. So, and life continues to go on. Lucy's death was 2 years ago on July 30th, 3 or 4 days ago. And I went out and talked to her a little while, but clearly I'm not I'm a little better shape than I was 2 years ago, right? And I have mixed feelings about that.
And as far as I know, you have another poetry book this year. I don't know if it's out yet. Tell us about that book if you want.
Well, the weird thing for me is that book's coming out in October 26th from High Frequency Press. It won their inaugural Morse Code Poetry Contest. It's called Negotiable Gods, but it's the poems that, as clear from our conversation, the poems in Good Bad Baby were written over an intense, reasonably short period of time. I think I wrote the whole book in about 6 or 7 months. Okay. But the poems in this book are the poems that I wrote over a 3 or 4 year period before Goodbye Baby. So it's kind of an odd experience to me. I've got a set of proofs sitting right here I've been looking at, and Lucy is alive and pretty well. She's limping a little bit, but she's back, and no one in the world is going to notice that or care except me. But it has been this kind of strange process with the books coming out in the reverse order, having written them, considering the material. A lot of times it wouldn't make any difference at all, but some fairly tumultuous things have been happening, including both my parents dying and during this period of years. So, but it's fine. People can read them as they will.
And what are you writing these days? Do you have a project that's taking your time and focus?
Well, as you experienced, I get a little bit of stress going through the proof process and trying to get a book out. And so doing two in a year is taking up a lot of my energy, frankly. I did just get back from a residency in Spain in May and had a very good month there. So things are things are starting to, and I wrote poems that month again. So I'm getting a little things starting to appear around the edges. I'm getting a little stack of new material here, but I don't think there's going to be another book for quite a while. And it's been, as we announced on the book, this Good Bad Baby is my first book of poems published in 6 years, which is unprecedented. And I knew when um, Welcome to Worship the Pig came out that I could just tell it was going to be a while before there was another book. And I was right. I told everybody that. And I thought it was just kidding, but I knew it was going to be a while. I don't know why I knew that, but one thing I stopped and I wrote that book of essays, little essays, and those were so that kind of took up the COVID time. Um, um, what's that book called? Any idea? Before the Storm Takes It Away. So it was nice to do something that the timing of that worked out pretty well for me. But I went quite a while without writing any poems. And the older I get, the more that happens. I don't worry about it. I really don't. If I go a few months or even a year without writing any poems, it doesn't bother me one way or the other.
It
Uh,
scares me whenever that happens to me because there was one time I didn't write for 11 years.
yeah,
So, and I think that whenever I don't write for too long, that means that I have stepped away and I'm edging out of my poet
yeah.
personality. I'm starting to function in another part of my brain and basically going back to the artist, the poet. It takes time and it takes um, work that I have to write and throw away to get back to it. So,
That's a long
yeah.
time. Oh,
And I don't want to waste that time. I want to kind of stay in the neighborhood of the writer personality if I can help it.
I don't want to push my luck here, but so far I've been okay with whatever kind of muscle memory you want to call it. Like when I got to Spain, I hadn't written a poem for several months. I found that in 3 or 4 days, I can feel like I'm kind of getting back in shape again. I don't have to, it doesn't take a long time. But again, that's not something I want to keep trying to prove necessarily. It's just I've been lucky about that. And you asked me, I do get a little coy about my secret projects and things. But one thing, so there might be one or two that I'm not quite ready to mention yet. But I'm also looking forward when I retire, which should be pretty soon, to start drawing a lot again and painting. I miss the visual stuff, and I don't know. I'm curious to see how that's going to work in conjunction with the writing. Obviously, I could be drawing and painting now if I really wanted to, but I let it slip away from me. And in fact, I just finished reading a book on perspective, which I was way in the weeds. I was completely confused about midway through, but I'm ready to start doing that a little bit, see what happens. Maybe working with some clay.
You mentioned Spain a couple of times, and I want to talk a little bit about traveling because you have been all over the world and you have also been a writer in residence in a few countries. So tell us about travel and what it does for you in your writing.
I guess travels works a couple of different ways for me, Katerina. I have done a lot of writing residencies at a lot of art places, and these are I'm not going to say I'm not having fun, but these trips are pretty much business. I write a lot while I'm there, and I work a lot while I'm there. And of course, the trick is not to write tourist poems. Luckily, I have enough ego. All my poems are really about me anyway. It doesn't really matter where I am. I can just process everything and keep rolling if I get lucky. So those are work trips, and I've done a lot of them, and I've been really blessed to have been able to do that. And I've made a lot of friends too. The other trip, in fact, I think I think if I went over to the bookcase and pulled them out and actually looked at how many of my poems that I've published have been written at residencies, it would be maybe the majority of them. I would say certainly more than half. But the other kind of trip is just I'll just like travel. Well, there's the teaching trip that you mentioned, which is a very different kind of experience. And there's just traveling for fun. Like I'm obsessed with Southeast Asia right now. I recently took a food tour to Vietnam that was just wonderful, and now I want to get to Laos and Cambodia. But here's the curious thing about that: I won't write about those. Those are different. I don't know what's going on in my head, but I've done it long enough that I know. You've never heard me say or write a word about Vietnam before, have you? And you won't ever hear it again. It was a great trip. I really enjoyed it, but I was very much a tourist during that trip. I wasn't working and I wasn't processing things the same way. Does that make any sense? And I just don't. I would have nothing to say. It would be terribly presumptuous, I think. No.
I've traveled quite a bit and I've never written any travel poems.
But you see what I'm suggesting about the difference between the two,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I've had friends, I've had many people go to India and say they were so overwhelmed they could never write about it or it took them years. Well, I did a 2 month writing residency in India, out on the outskirts of Delhi. I had no problem at all. India is an amazing, maybe the most amazing place I've ever been. But I was writing up a storm just like always because I was in that mode of again sort of processing and the things that I know I need to do day to day to take care of myself and get the poem done. Wasn't a problem at all. You know, but if I'd gone there as a tourist, or I'd taken a food tour or culture tour or something, I would never have word about it.
You have served as a professor at Middle Tennessee State University for over 3 decades. How has higher education changed over the years?
Oh, goodness. I didn't think you were going there. 33 years of bliss as a Blue Raider. Um, oh, I don't have any profound insights. I think you don't have to look very hard to see that this more of a corporate model has emerged. If I could kind of leave it at that a little bit. Um, there seems to be a lot more picayune little legal things we have to do all the time. How that manifests itself in the classroom sometimes is subtly, but you know, I can't complain. What I thought you were going to ask me is uh, how the being an academic has affected my writing, which I really don't think it has very much. I don't. You said you wanted to read an. I forget exactly what you said. You wanted me to read an academic poem. I don't think I have very many of those. I tend to step when I come home from work. That tends to be about it for that. You know, I mean, what I could extrapolate all day long is I mean, look, it's a great job. It's an
Mhm.
easy job. The money's good. When I hear people complain about how hard, I mean, I'm not going to get into all that, but I have colleagues who just, bellyache all the time about how they're overwhelmed with work. And apparently we're doing either they're being disingenuous or we're doing the job very, very differently, one or the other. As far as I'm concerned, it's a 3 day a week job and with 4 months off in the summer. And you get to be around young people, and sometimes that can be, you know, you can have some great students, and that's just bonus if you get that. And that's why I'm having a little bit of hesitation about stepping away, but um, we shall see. It certainly has. I haven't answered your question very well, but I'll say this for academia: it certainly has enabled a lifestyle for me that I liked that fit me, including allowing the travel we were talking about. You have the time and the means to do it. No. If you can just rally the selfishness to steal all that time for yourself, which I'm happy to do. Mae West said too much of a good thing is wonderful, but 33 years seems like a pretty good run to me. I was already a true Blue Raider a long time before right when you got here. Oh.
I have one last question for you, Gaylord. What is the most important thing you teach your students? If there is one thing you want them to remember from your workshop or class, what is it?
I'll say two things and try to keep it short. One is I do think that I can, altering the questions a little bit, one thing I think I can do for students is to help them troubleshoot some things that they that they don't want to do or don't need to do. I never took creative writing classes, and I noticed in graduate school at Ohio State, my friends' poems got a lot better than mine very, very quickly. And I was uh, what I came to think that was because they were getting some very good instruction about again just sort of troubleshooting. Don't do this. Don't do this. You don't have to figure this out on your own. And they took that, and I didn't. I took the longer road. Um, so I think I can help them that way a little bit if they want the help. But I guess the other thing I'd say is I don't know that I announced this in class, but I'm a little skeptical about genius. Hell, I'm even getting a little skeptical about the idea of talent. Um, I like a certain amount of hard-headedness and sticking with things and learning a craft. I think there's the analogy breaks down. The sports analogy always breaks down when you're talking about art, but there's something there. There's something about the 10,000 hour rule. There's something about learning what you're doing as a skill, as a craft, and trying to de-romanticize all that other stuff a little bit. So that's sort of the tone of the class, I guess, largely.
And I have found out that there is no substitute for having something to say.
Mm. If you ain't got it in you, you can't blow it out, right? No, you're absolutely. But that sounds a little contradictory to what I said about talent, but it's just like guys, just do the work and wear black if you want to. That's neither here nor there as far as I'm concerned. But uh, just stick with it and try to learn what you're doing and a set of skills you can come back to. Yeah. If you have something inside you that might be nice too. Come to think of it.
Well, having something to say is different than having talent.
Well, the other thing that we're talking, I mean, you can edit this as you will, but I always stress to the classes, it's a lovely, you always want your poems to be smarter than you are, you know, and and you also don't need to worry about what they're about as you're writing them, because that will, if you, it seems to me, if you're doing your job correctly, that's what you're doing. You're discovering the poem, and those are two huge advantages. You don't have to be that smart, and you don't have to know what you're doing. So, if you know what I mean, I'm being a little bit glib here, but seriously, I do believe that, and that's a great advantage. So, you can sit there and until the thing sounds like till it sounds pretty good, and then you can take the credit for it. Which is also why I think we never run out of poems to write. Relatedly, I mean, it's not because you have a pool of things you feel compelled to say. It's that you found a process by many people have talked about this in various ways. You found a process by which to come to things to say, so to speak. And of course, that can go on forever. Sometimes like a disease, really, but nevertheless, is there. It's been a pleasure talking to you as well, and I'm a huge fan of accents, and I'm really grateful to you. So,
Thank you, Gaylord. And I look forward to seeing you soon in the bookstore.